Let's delve into how this might look in your day-to-day practice. I'm going to walk you through an exemplar scenario, modelling exactly how I would use the Mathematics Mastery platform and resources to develop conceptual understanding in my lessons. Pay attention to the details because after the exemplar, there will be a practice scenario for you to complete. Take a moment to read the scenario. Fractions is a strand of mathematics that we often see pupils struggling with. If we think back to our procedural understanding map at the beginning of this session, and just how many instructions a pupil would need to memorise to be able to get from the hotel to the theatre for each different concept within the strand of fractions, we can begin to see why pupils might struggle if their teacher tells them this. Pause the video now to read through the instructions. Resume the video when you're ready to do so. Arguably, the instructions are clear and concise, but we are relying so heavily on pupil memory. Even those pupils who do remember all the steps aren't making connections to allow this knowledge to sit in their long-term memory, and thus likely to forget. So I'm going to imagine that I am this teacher. I taught the lesson in this way, and most of my pupils are struggling to remember all the steps. Mistakes are being made, frustration levels are high, and even some of my high-prior retainers are showing poor resilience. I need to reteach the lesson using a different approach. I know I have time to do so because Mathematics Mastery designed their curriculum with consolidation time included. I'm going to go back to watch the PD video within the unit planning section on my Mastery and think about how I can utilise this information to better deliver this lesson next time. During the video, please look at page 8 in your handbook.
Hello and welcome to this video about using Cuisenaire rods to represent fractions.
We're going to start by having the yellow rod have a length of 1 and think about how can we work out the length of the red rod. Pupils can start by exploring trying to make a train of the same length using these rods, but they'll soon see that 2 isn't long enough and 3 is too long. And this is where we can think about using the unit cube. So if I make a train out of these unit cubes, I can see that 5 of these is the same length as the yellow. So therefore, how can I write the length of one of these unit cubes? Any ideas?
So the yellow rod has a value of 1, and using the unit cubes we're dividing the length 1 into 5 equal parts. So surely each unit cube must represent and have a value of 1/5.
Yeah, the whole is 1 and it's 5 equal parts, so it must be 1/5. So we start by writing the vinculum because we're recording a fraction. There are 5 equal parts, which is the denominator, and we're thinking about one of these. So building on this, we can now work out the length of the red by seeing that it is the same as 2 of these unit cubes. So if one of them is 1/5, then 2 must be 2/5.
So I can label this as having a value of 2/5.
Okay, so this can also be used to explore improper fractions. If we were to repeat with the same, that the yellow rod has a length of 1. What is the value of the black rod?
Well, that's interesting. I'm not sure how I'd work that out. I think I would start with the unit cubes. So I know that the value of each unit cube represents 1/5. And I can see that the black rod must have a value of greater than 1.
It's longer, isn't it?
Yes.
And if we were to continue with our unit cubes, we'd see that the black rod has a length of 7 of those unit cubes. Now we already established by looking at this as the whole, and there's 5 equal parts that make up the whole. So one of those equal parts must have a value of 1/5. So how can we then use that knowledge to think about the value of the black rod? 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, 5/5, 6/5, 7/5. We could record it as 7/5. So I've got my vinculum, there are 5 equal parts, and this time we have 7 of them. Now this type of fraction is called an improper fraction because the numerator is larger than the denominator.
So I suppose I could write this in a different way. Surely I could say that if this has a value of 1, then my black rod has a value of 1 and 2/5.
So it's almost like we want to move these ones out of the way, bring that down so that we can see it is 1 and 2/5. And from doing this work, we see that these are equivalent. They mean the same thing. 7/5 is equal to 1 and 2/5.
So I suppose using this method I could then challenge my children to find the value of all of the other Cuisenaire rods.
Absolutely, you start thinking about, so what is the value of the blue, or of the orange, or of the dark green, the light green, and playing around and building up that flexibility with fractions using the rods is a really good way to develop that deep conceptual understanding of fractions.
But what if I wanted to change the value that I am assigning to the yellow rod?
Oh, absolutely. People should be really flexible, thinking about that doesn't always have to have the same value.
I'm now going to model to you exactly how to intellectually prepare using one of Maths Mastery's PD videos to support pupil conceptual understanding. As you can see, I've got the unit narrative in front of me. I've printed this out for ease of the video, but feel free to do this online if you prefer. I've also got a notepad alongside the unit narrative. That's purely a personal preference because I don't like to scribble all over this. If you work in that way with notes, then that's absolutely fine. Okay, I'm just going to circle this lesson because it's the lesson that I just taught and didn't work out the way I wanted to. The children didn't have the prior knowledge they needed, and I've now gone back to the PD video, which is up here in the unit narrative, to get some support on this and how I can model better for my next lesson. Okay, there are 3 things that I'm going to focus on while I'm watching the video. The first thing is to ensure that I have the appropriate resources to reteach and remodel this. After watching that PD video, I know that I'm going to need Cuisenaire rods, and I'm going to need enough of them to go round the whole class. That might be one between 2 or one between 3, but enough for everybody. I'm also going to need individual whiteboards. Okay, and I also need to think about myself as a teacher and how I'm going to model that to my class. I might choose to use a visualizer or perhaps a large Cuisenaire and blue tack. Okay, but it's important to note this because we don't want to be fumbling at the front of the classroom trying to hold up all of the manipulatives because it doesn't support people understanding in that way. The second thing I'm going to be looking at is my own understanding of the language around that model. So you will have noticed in the PD video that you just watched that we use terminology such as vinculum. It is expected of the children, therefore we should be modelling it to them. They also use the terms denominator, numerator. Now, these are ones you might naturally say, but writing them down just brings them to the forefront of your mind and supports you in enabling you to use that vocabulary when you model. They also use the words unit cube. If you're not familiar with Cuisenaire rods, that's important to make note of. Okay, that's the little white cube that helps you to divide up the rods. Okay, they also used yellow and black rod. Important to think about that if you're going to replicate a model from the PD video, that you utilise exactly the same resources to be able to do so. It's easier for you to remember and therefore easier for the children to remember. I might also make a note of things like the same length means that they're equivalent. to ensure that I verbalise that to my children and don't assume they know, I'm also going to write down things like improper fraction and mixed number. Making a note of this on paper supports you to remember to mention it when you're modelling to your pupils. Finally, I'm going to really think hard about the possible misconceptions or barriers to pupil success within this task. Okay? If we think about those misconceptions and barriers in advance, it supports us with helping children to develop their conceptual understanding. I'm thinking off the top of my head that actually a lot of children in my class don't know the values of the Cuisenaire rods, and they might think, okay, so maybe yellow is worth 5. I need to be really explicit in saying to them, no, the yellow rod is worth 1 today. I'm going to make a note of that, and I'm going to be explicit in explaining that it's not always the case. Okay, I'm making a note of that for myself so that I don't forget to tell the pupils that. I might also have spotted in the video, and you may have done too, that when we put the black rod underneath and we have the 7 unit cubes, children might assume that the unit cubes are then worth 7ths instead of 5ths. So it's important that I model that explicitly to them. The unit cubes are still worth 5ths because the yellow rod is worth 1. And therefore, when we have 7 of the unit cube, it's worth 7/5. So it's important that I understand that vocabulary before I teach it to children. I might make a note of that here. Pause the video and take time to answer the following question. Hopefully you said,